Yes, and welcome to another edition of My Fellow Idahoans. And if you don't know me yet, you'll know me before this show is over. You have an opportunity to make some money during this show, so you may want to get a piece of pencil and a paper. And at any rate, my name is Jim Thomas. I live here in Boise. I'm just kind of a middle-class bloke wandering around, trying to make a living, pay my bills, not getting in any trouble. And anyway, but I had this great idea for a show. So it's My Fellow Idahoans, and it's the information that you need as a fellow Idahoan. We always start the show with a Aesop's fable. And these are pre-Christian. These were kind of in the Greco area, Greece, where Greece is now. I think they called it something else. I forget what it is. Doesn't matter. The point is, these are great lessons in life, and it's about human nature. This is slide number 8, Nick, if you want to put that up. The Raven and the Swan. A raven saw a swan and desired to secure for himself the same beautiful plumage. Supposing that the swan's splendid white color arose from his washing in the water in which he swam, the raven left the altars in which the neighborhood where he picked up his living and took up residence in the lakes and the pools. But cleansing his feathers as often as he would, he could not change their color, while through want of food he perished. The moral of the story is, change of habit cannot alter nature. And I was talking to one of my friends. I said, no, this is a really interesting fable. You know, just because you want something to be one way doesn't mean you're going to get it. You know, Mother Nature rules, period. And there really is no Mother Nature. It's the Creator. That's just a word people use for the Creator. At any rate, oftentimes I think the socialists that are in this country and other countries, they ignore the nature of humans. And that's why socialism turns into a huge mess with people like in Cuba. Oh, they're all equal and equally miserable. And so anytime we hear about socialized anything, just say no. That is not what made America great. Well, with that in mind, next I would like to always point out the next slide is slide number 9. And this is my favorite little book. And it is a little book. See how skinny this little book is? But it's probably one of the best books around. This is called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. And Frederick Bastiat, he writes, and he was a French political philosopher, educator. And in 1850 he wrote this book, and it still applies today because he's talking about the evils of socialism. And, you know, and he starts off with the basic concept that we have life, we humans have liberty, we have property. And they exist because because they just exist. And what Frederick says, life, liberty, property do not exist because man has laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. That is, laws to protect life, liberty, and property. And what he says in this little book, and it's really great, and you can still get this book on Amazon, etc. And what he basically says in this little book is when you start asking government to do anything except protect life, liberty, and property, then you're looking for trouble. And that's, again, a huge lesson in life that we have ignored recently in the last 100 years or so in this country. And that's why we have the mess we have today. We have been demanding that our government do this for us and do that for us and do this, and we have a mess. But fortunately, there are a few citizens in this country that want to help clean up the mess and get us back on the right track. And I happen to have one of them standing right next to me. Steven Thayn, welcome back to My Fellow Idahoans.
It's nice to be here, Jim.
And now you are a senator. You served 3 terms, I believe, as a representative?
I served 3 terms in the House, and now I'm a state senator. That's correct.
State senator. And your district is a huge district that goes right across kind of from Montana to, what, Oregon, Washington, or whatever, across central Idaho?
It's about 15 miles from Oregon all the way across the middle to Montana.
To Montana.
To Montana.
Jeez. Oh, boy. So that's a pretty big place. Did you have any idea how many square miles or any kind of...
There's 14,000 square miles.
14,000 square miles.
Yeah, now, a district here in Boise, there's one of the representatives that said his district was 26 square miles.
Well, even that sounds big to me.
Well, that's
anyway.
14,000 is fairly large.
There's what, nine districts just in Ada County, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've never counted them, but probably, yeah.
Yeah, there are. There was 8, now there's 9. Well, anyway, so you brought some slides also.
I did.
And you've been doing some thinking. You live in Emmett.
I live in Emmett.
And so you have a lot of time to sit and think in Emmett.
I could tell that's where you're going, but you know, that's really true. For 18 years, I ran a dairy, and I did most of the milking. So twice a day, about 2.5 hours a day, I milked, and it's somewhat repetitive, so I had an opportunity to think. So yeah, I've done a lot of thinking.
And you have an excellent, at least in my opinion, command of the English language, both written and oral.
My cows were great teachers.
But you write well, and I've really enjoyed some of the writing that you've done, the papers on various public policy issues. And at any rate, so tell us what kind of slides, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, today I want to talk about the cause of prosperity. Now, everybody wants to be prosperous, right? Do you know anybody that says, man, I wish I was poorer than I am today. I want less stuff.
No.
Most people desire prosperity. It's a human characteristics. They want to have enough to eat. They want food. They'd like a nice home. So I'm going to talk about prosperity and its cause.
You mean you have to cause it? Well, I guess you do.
Well, I think so. And the first slide is slide number 2.
Slide number 2.
Yeah. There's a young child. Every child at that age wants to become prosperous. They don't think about it too much, but they want to have food, they want to be warm. But yet we have so much poverty in the world. Are we unintentionally teaching our children the principles of poverty rather than the principles of prosperity?
Okay, very well.
So what I'd like to do is talk to you about the prosperity formula, which is slide number 3. And there's basically 3 things. One is access to natural resources. Second, there has to be labor. See, wealth just doesn't take place. You have to work to produce things, unless you're a hunter-gatherer. And then the third thing is capital. So to put that into perspective, to understand what I'm really getting at here, I'm going to talk about the hunter-gatherer society, the agrarian society, and the industrial society, and the differences between the 3.
Okay.
So on slide number 4, we see a picture of some hunter-gatherers. Now, these people have access to natural resources. That's where they live. They live out in nature. They work. They're good people, but they don't really have much. Their clothing is minor, is not like what we have. They might have a simple bow, an arrow, something to carry their food in. But what they do is they go find the food sources that nature provides and consume it. So hunter-gatherer is a consumption mentality.
Yeah, because they get hungry, but they have to go out and go wherever the food is to get it.
They go out and go where the food is. Now they can be very kind people, because they might get hungry someday and they'll want someone to share with them. So if they find some extra food, they'll let other people know about it. But they don't have very large societies. They tend to be fairly small. The second society is an agricultural society, and that's slide number 5.
Well, can we make another point on this hunter-gatherer thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is that they're depending on Mother Nature again. They're depending on Mother Nature for the quantity of their bounty, so to speak.
Yes.
So if there's very little rain one year, tough, right? The animals aren't as plentiful because they need water to kill, and the crops that might grow, or whatever plants that they might consume, they're sparser. And so they got to travel further, etc. Well, okay, so that hunter-gatherer is, season to season, is really dependent upon Mother Nature.
Well, and you notice the picture of the 3 young men that we had there. They were fairly thin.
Yeah. Well, they had to hike so far for their a little bit of food.
That's probably a good thing, but they were pretty
maybe,
good shape. And
maybe Michelle Obama, if we get back into a hunter-gatherer society, that'll cure her desire for all of our little munchkins to get in shape. Well, anyway.
We digress.
Yes, we do.
So we'll go to slide number 5, where we have the Agricultural Society. And there, the Agricultural Society is a little bit different. They have more tools. They have more capital. So the increase, there's two things that agricultural societies do. One, they understand the production cycle. That if you've got some seed and you plant it and cultivate it, you can harvest it. I call that the production cycle. So a hunter-gatherer would see some wheat and just eat it.
And he might have to hike 10 miles to find it.
To find it, but an agricultural farmer will say, "Oh, if I ate that seed now, I wouldn't have a crop later." So they're starting to understand what capital is. Capital is unconsumed wealth.
Okay.
That's what capital is. And what capital we have in the United States is everything that doesn't occur naturally. So buildings, streets, pipes, cars, tools, you name it, everything's capital. We'll get to that in a minute. So an agricultural society, they tend to grow and have bigger population bases and even start having government and artisans and division of labor, and so they can become more prosperous. Eventually, you can become an industrial society. And so if you show slide number 6, now the reason I show the toilet and the bathroom there is most of us like our indoor plumbing. This is one of the benefits of being an industrial society that understands the use of capital.
Okay.
Because in that hunter-gatherer society, they do not have a shower, unless they they don't have warm running water, they don't have a toilet, they don't have a lot of these things. So, but what causes an industrial society to be so productive is their use and understanding of capital. They invested in tools, they invested in factories. So you might go to slide number 7. And so we've got garden tools there, we've got an assembly line, we've got some simple hand tools, and then we've got that huge truck and crane that's probably mining ore. So we get this, industrial societies are able to produce so much because of the capital they've invested in the production process. Now, why this is important is I believe that our children are being taught something different than what the prosperity formula. And what's the prosperity formula, Jim? Do you remember those 3 things?
Natural resources.
Yep.
Capital was the last one, and labor.
And labor. Okay, so in our schools today, what are young children being taught by many of their teachers about logging, mining, manufacturing, drilling for oil? What are they being taught?
I have no idea.
Well, many of them are being taught that it's harmful to the environment to use natural resources.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the human race is the worst thing to happen to Earth.
There are people that feel like that humans are a parasite that are harming the planet, and anything they do is harmful. So their view of using natural resources is it shouldn't be done. We shouldn't be accessing our natural resources. So many of our children are being taught that. And through our federal policies, we're having restrictions because of Endangered Species Act, Environmental Protection Act, that's driving up the cost, meaning taking away capital from the production process, and we're not able to access natural resources.
Yeah, and people would complain like, the multimillionaires, and tax them more and more and more. Well, if you leave the money with them, they don't just sit there and guard a big pile of cash. They're investing it in business.
Exactly.
That's the capital that's used in our society, right?
Right. And so I'm maintaining, and then our entitlement programs are taking labor out of the labor force and paying them to eat and consume, but there's no expectation that some of these people become productive. So the entitlement system is is limiting our access to labor. And then the last one is capital, where I think our modern society is returning back to the hunter-gatherer mentality of wealth, and that is, if you find wealth, you need to consume it. So someone who's wealthy, rather than seeing that wealth as an important part in the production process, that you need to invest it in tools and production, they're saying we need to take that and use it for Medicaid, we need to use it to feed people, we need to use it for consumptive activities. So they're wanting to take the wealth that they find, just like a hunter-gatherer would, consume it, and then go find some other wealth.
Yeah, and then bingo, it's gone, it's not available to reinvest, etc. Well, very interesting. So what implication does that have on Idaho? And we have a legislative session coming up.
That's a great question. If, I'm correct, and I think I am, I mean, you need to produce.
Sounds good to me.
You need capital, you need labor, and you need access to natural resources. The state of Idaho has 63% of its state controlled by the federal government, which is continually limiting our access to those resources. So we need to work on opening up federal land to the use of those natural resources. We are getting, most of the forest fires this summer were actually on federal lands, and most of the productive resources that were used were on state lands, because the federal land, they're just letting the trees die, and so it's turning into fires. I call it modern environmental pollution. There's more pollution put into the air in Idaho this year because of those fires than all the cars have ever put in the state of Idaho.
Wow.
I mean, if you did the calculations, I'm sure that's the case, because there's over 1 million acres that burned.
Wow. And how many acres do we have in Idaho? Do you have any idea? In other words, what percent of the state burned? I think there's something like 83 or something, 83 million.
I should know that, and I don't.
Yeah, I think I calculated it once. Do you know how many square miles?
I don't know that either.
Okay, all right, very good. At any rate, friends that live elsewhere, and they'll say, and they hear the news, the famous mainstream media, and they say, "Oh, Idaho, fires, 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 everywhere, fires," But then, you find out how many acres burned, and it's like 0.001%.
Well, there's still a fairly small percent of the state that burned.
Yes.
The point is, though, we're not using those natural resources.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one issue. Another issue is we need to reform the entitlement system, particularly Medicaid, to encourage people and to give them off-ramps. I call an off-ramp, if you had a freeway that only had on-ramps, before long the whole system would plug up because nobody would get off the freeway. So with the entitlement system, we haven't constructed off-ramps to help people get off.
Now, entitlements, you're talking about specifically
Food stamps, Medicaid are the two big ones.
food stamps and Medicaid, which is health care for the poorer folks, if you will.
Right.
And then there's the welfare itself.
Smaller percent.
Small percent. Okay.
So we can work on that issue with the intent of helping them become productive, helping them gain skills, helping them with mentors, helping them become independent, which is where happiness comes from, is when if someone's independent, self-sufficient. If you didn't have any money and you just had to sit home and depend on your next food stamp, delivery, you wouldn't be real happy with that, I don't think.
Well, no, I wouldn't.
And I don't think they are either. So we need to help them help themselves. Because these people are not stupid, they're not motivated. Sometimes they just need to know how to access the system. And so we can help them.
It was interesting. I live in District 17, which is down by BSU and then up on the bench, all the way out to Cole or so, maybe even a little further. But the point is that I went to our legislators in District 17 are very, very wonderful. They have a monthly meeting and invite people in the district to come. And they, so I asked them one day, so I go to the meetings, and they're kind of fun. And they made the comment once, they said, look at this. There are about 40,000 people in District 17, and there are, what, maybe 40 of you here? And we're making decisions that affect everybody.
Right.
Budget decisions, school, education, etc. And there's only 40 here? Well, anyway, I asked them, and that's totally unrelated, but I asked them at one point, you know, concerning these entitlements, welfare, food stamps, HUD housing, etc. I said, where do I find the statistics of how many people Health and Welfare Department has gotten off of food stamps, gotten out of HUD housing, and gotten off of welfare? Where do I find those numbers? And they looked at each other. I said, don't know. I said, isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? And they don't even measure it? Oh.
Actually, no, that's not the goal of our current entitlement system.
And it should be, though.
But it should be. In fact, Nancy Pelosi, just to give you this idea of we're returning back to a hunter-gatherer mentality of capital, she said the best way to stimulate the economy is to increase unemployment benefits. So she's saying the best way to stimulate the economy is to have people not work, that consume food, don't increase the amount of money we spend on them, amount of wealth that they consume. So she is openly advocating for return to a hunter-gatherer society, though she probably doesn't know it. Well, I actually read an interesting gentleman. His name was Roger Malcolm Mitchell, and he wrote a book in about 1995, and three basic premises. First one was a growing economy needs an increasing money supply. Yeah, we could talk about that, but that's not the most important point. Second, that what was the second one? The third one, anyway, was that the federal government can print all the money it wants. It doesn't even need to raise taxes. It could just print money and pay all of its bills.
Sure.
What's interesting about that is it's a consumption-based mentality where they're not saying we need to take that wealth and invest in a factory or build an electrical generating facility or build a dam or any of these things. They're saying we need to have the government take the money and spend it. And what government invests in is usually consumption.
Versus capital.
Versus production that requires capital, right. So they're taking this capital and investing it in people to eat, to consume fuel, but they're not focusing on the production side of the equation. They're focused completely on the consumption side.
You know, and you see the mess that our current president is inheriting from the previous administration. Oh, it's just a real mess. Unemployment went way up in the last 4 years. Taxes, now we have the Treasury Secretary, Timothy Geithner, saying that the Congress should let the federal government have an infinite debt ceiling.
I think
I'm telling you, normally people would get fired for saying something like that if they had a job with the federal government.
Well, people are starting to believe this Roger Malcolm Mitchell. Because to have an unlimited debt ceiling will do a couple of things. One, the president really doesn't need Congress anymore if he can just continue to spend without their permission. So we're centralizing power in the federal government, because if they can create all the money they want, then they can buy the loyalty of the states. The states will become dependent upon federal money. And if we don't do what they say, they won't give us the money, and then we'll be thrown out of office. This is one of those issues that's coming up. That's why I think talking about what causes prosperity is so important. We get lost in politics sometimes about specific tiny issues of if we should increase funding for Medicaid or have a health exchange. What we should be talking about with our elected officials is how can we increase the amount of productivity in our society.
Well, there you go. So here we have a federal government that's just really going off the rail. They're heading down the socialist path as fast and hard as they can. We know that makes a big mess out of things, and we've got this the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I almost have to laugh or cry, one or the other, because already PPACA, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, it's already caused my my HSA policy premiums to go up about 20%. Because the insurance companies are forced by the federal government. Government is force. That's Frederick Bastiat. Government is force. Government is forcing insurance companies to cover stuff that by 100% that they didn't have to cover before, so premiums have to go skyrocketing. So the Affordable Care Act is causing my insurance to be unaffordable. Well, now, Stephen, we're almost out of time. I did promise folks if they got a piece of pencil and a paper, they might have a chance to make some money. So, you know, my email address, so you want to write that down first, because the first person to email me, and I'll tell you what the question you're going to have in a second, my email address is real easy. It's my first name, James, @thomas.net. So james@thomas.net. That's pretty easy. All right. Now, here is a quote. We're talking about Medicare, or Obamacare, I should say, or the PPACA bill. And this is what Justice Roberts, you know, a lot of conservative folks think that Justice Roberts, really, it was a horrible decision. Well, he did some interesting writing, though. And here is something, in fact, you quoted it. You got me turned on to this, and I love this thing. So here you go. This is the last slide. Send the feds packing. That's my title, not the justices. At any rate, the perfect test case to challenge federal authority is Obamacare. The perfect test case to challenge federal authority. What? States can challenge? Here he goes. Justice Roberts said in the Affordable Care Act ruling, he said the independent power of the states also serves as a check on the power of the federal government. By denying any one government complete jurisdiction over all the concerns of public life, federalism protects the liberty of the individual from arbitrary power. And what he's talking about is Obama and his gang of czars. The next paragraph that Justice Roberts wrote, and this is really something that I hope our Governor Otter kind of reads maybe about 10,000 times. In the typical case, we look to the states to defend their prerogatives by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments when they do not want to embrace the federal policies as their own. The states are separate and independent sovereigns. Sometimes they have to act like it. So what he is telling the states, even though Obamacare said, well, isn't it constitutional? Well, maybe some pieces are constitutional, but that doesn't mean it's good law. It's bad law. It is horrible law for our economy going forward and our society as a whole. And the states are sovereign entities. All we have to do is say, hey, we're not doing it. Sorry, go away. End of story. And that's what Roberts is telling the states they can do. So we have 1 minute. I'll let you close the show.
Oh, well, it's nice to be here again. It's been a little while since I spent some time on my fellow Idahoans. It's always a pleasure, Sir James. So what's the reward if someone emails you? What are they going to get?
Oh, that's right. What you do, if you found the typo in that last slide, send the feds packing. If you found the typo and can tell me the word that was misspelled, and you're the first one to email me, I'll give you $50. There you go. So if you notice the typo, I'll send you $50. And it comes out of my daughter's allowance, so it's okay. Anyway, that's it for this week's edition of My Fellow Idahoans. It's been a pleasure bringing it to you, and I really appreciate Steven Thayn for being on the show again, and my wonderful daughter Lena, who's visiting as a stand-in camera woman. Thank you, Lena. And thank you all for watching. Good night.